In my current role, I work on all aspects of food systems. My focus at the moment is on evidence gaps in terms of food insecurity, women's involvement in the food chain, and simplified nutritional food labeling schemes. And I also run the OECD's Food Chain Analysis Network. I'm moderating today's event where we will be discussing how to make better policies for school meals. As a knowledge partner to the UN Food Systems Summit process, the OECD has convened this webinar and anticipate discussions to come some of the following ideas. What is known about the actual performance of school meal programs? Are these programs being designed in a coherent manner with the different food systems dimensions, such as food security and nutrition, livelihoods, and environmental sustainability being taken into account? How do countries evaluate the effectiveness of programs? What are key priorities for school meal programs and the likely implications? And what are the challenges and opportunities for these programs? And how are these being addressed? We have an exciting session ahead of us, as you'll see from our program. Following the interventions from our speakers, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions. At any stage, actually, you can use the chat to ask your questions. This webinar will run until 2:30 Paris time. We ask you, if possible, to leave your cameras on, so we feel more like we are in a real discussion. We also have French to English and English to French translation. You can actually select your preferred language in the Zoom option. So let's begin this session with the opening remarks from Leanne Jackson. Leanne is the head of the Agro-Food Trade and Markets Division in the OECD's Trade and Agriculture Directorate. Leanne joined the OECD 2 years ago after 16 years at the World Trade Organization, where she served as the secretary to the Committee on Agriculture. Leanne oversees our team, which is responsible for leading the OECD work on food systems and producing the annual OECD FAO Agricultural Outlook, among other things. Leanne, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Celine, and welcome everyone to this webinar. It's really great to have you all with us. Just to set the stage a little bit, we know that many OECD countries have school meal programs in place to meet objectives related to a number of priorities, including food security and nutrition, enabling educational outcomes for all students, but also to support farmers and others who are working in the food supply chain. So it's a complex system of objectives that countries are navigating. And one of the big objectives, of course, relates to food insecurity. From our recent research in my division on the socioeconomic and demographic aspects of food security and nutrition, we identified that low socioeconomic single-parent households are among the most vulnerable to food insecurity. And therefore, the provision of meals in schools is one way that government can address this problem, this inequality problem. Another finding from our research is that even populations in developed countries aren't eating the recommended 5-a-day serving of fruits and vegetables, which relates to optimal nutritional outcomes. And again, the provision of food in schools can really go a long way in addressing this gap. And all of this comes with a caveat, which is to say that measurement of food security and nutrition, even in OECD countries, is often ad hoc and in many cases poorly done. And there are particularly significant data gaps with respect to food insecurity and food consumption by children. And this is an important area for work in order for us to understand better how to put our policies together to address these important objectives. Of course, food insecurity is one side of the issue. The other side has to do with obesity. So another policy objective for providing school meals is, in fact, to address this issue of childhood overweight and obesity, which we've seen rather alarming trends for in recent years. So from OECD research released in 2019 titled The Heavy Burden of Obesity, it was estimated that obesity-related diseases will claim more than 90 million lives in OECD countries in the next 30 years, with life expectancy reduced by nearly 3 years. And obesity and its related conditions can also reduce GDP. Some OECD estimates say as much as 3.3% of GDP reductions can come from this toll of obesity. And that, of course, has heavy implications for personal budgets, but also for governmental budgets in terms of how to address these costs. So giving these worrying health trends and also the economic costs, it's really important for countries to be thinking about how to address the factors that create the conditions for obesity rather than thinking about treating obesity once it's already happened. And maybe one other thing to notice, my team does a lot of work on food systems, which talks about how all these different policies and programs interrelate in terms of big societal objectives. Another area that food meals have implications for is related to agricultural policies. Provision of food for school meals is oftentimes part of a country's agricultural policy, ensuring demand for domestic supply. You can think about, for example, school milk programs. And procurement policies for food in institutions like schools can also stipulate that there's a sustainability characteristic involved in the way those food are supplied. But there are also rules, of course, to ensure that governments don't use procurement as a kind of trade barrier. So this is just to highlight some of the complexity around this question of school meals. So today's plan is we have a very full program ahead of us. We'll learn more about the School Meals Coalition, which has a goal of reaching a healthy meal every day for every child. And this coalition was launched as a part of last year's UN Food Systems Summit. We'll also hear from the Research Consortium for School Health and Nutrition that aims to provide policymakers of the coalition countries with practical guidance on school health and nutrition. And then we'll benefit from hearing from experts who will share with us their experiences of running school meal programs in their countries. Many of these programs have been in place for decades. So that's a really important aspect also of this webinar, the sharing of experiences. And importantly, we'll also tap into some of the OECD depth of research in this area, calling on some of our colleagues who have done some work supporting policies for supporting efforts to make better policies for school meals. So how we make school meal policies really depends on measuring their effectiveness, which also then depends on data and a systematic review of performance benchmarked against these objectives. My team is currently focused on where data to make better policies for food systems is missing. And as part of our work, we're identifying countries that are doing a good job. So this is one of the important ways that the OECD can contribute to this kind of peer learning across countries and a way of helping countries learn from best practices that other countries are using in these complex areas. So I really look forward to the discussions on this topic. And I think of it as a beginning of a conversation that I hope we can continue having. Over to you, Celine.
Thanks, Leanne, for those remarks. Now we'll hear from Ambassador Celine Jorgensen about the School Meals Coalition, Nutrition, Health and Education for Every Child. The coalition was launched at last year's UN Food Systems Summit held in September. Ambassador Celine Jorgensen is a permanent representative of France to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, to the World Food Programme and to the International Fund for Agricultural Development. Madame l'ambassadrice, vous avez la parole.
Merci beaucoup. Bonjour à tous.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone, dear colleagues. First of all, allow me to thank the OECD for organizing this meeting, a very important meeting. And it provides me with the opportunity to present the Coalition for School Lunches, School Meals Coalition, which is co-chaired by France and Finland. First of all, allow me to share with you the reasons why France has committed to joining and promoting this coalition at the very highest level, so the School Meals Coalition. First of all, in 2020, after decades of action carried out by governments and their partners, school meal programs benefit from a lot of coverage around the world. 388 million children, which is one school child out of two, received a daily meal at school. And even at those historical levels of deployment of school meals programs, there was still a lot to be done. Many children, especially in vulnerable areas, still suffered from hunger at school. School meals, therefore, up until 2020, appeared as one of the most major programs for social security in the world. Unfortunately, COVID-19 led to the closure of many schools, overhauling this program and the deployment of school meals. Many children were not able to, therefore, have access to these school meals, and some of them lost the only source they had for nutritious elements in the day. Around the world, and let me insist on this, across the world, we all face the same challenge, which could only be met together. And this is where the idea of a school meals coalition was born. So to respond to the pandemic, the objective is very clear, as you said, Celine and Leanne Jackson. The goal is to offer every child by 2030 the possibility to enjoy a healthy and nutritious meal every day. And I would like to say that in the end, it's much more than that. It's not just a school meal on the table. For many children around the world, this is a lot already. It's nutrition, it's health, and it's also to improve learning outcomes, especially for girls, to promote gender equality, and of course, to support the livelihoods of farmers and to support local economies. So all of this is a systemic approach, which we believed was important to showcase. In France, school meals provide a significant share of our cultural heritage. Access to nutritious meals at school at a very low cost has long been part of our education policy. School meals represent in France more than 1.1 billion meals a year in our country. And this is why, convinced by the importance of these programs around the world, President Emmanuel Macron personally committed in favor of the School Meals Coalition. He celebrated the launch of this coalition last November. Currently, nearly 60 countries around the world, especially in Africa, but not only, including 15 member countries of the OECD, have joined the School Meals Coalition, and nearly 50 partners, non-state partners, international organizations, research organizations, civil society, etc., have also joined the coalition. Countries, the members of the coalition, have committed at the highest level with very concrete commitments alongside researchers, civil society, activists to reestablish, to improve, and to significantly extend school meal programs around the world, especially for the 73 million girls and boys living in extreme poverty. The coalition, therefore, has a very broad political support at the highest level. Many heads of state and government are involved, and it's been mentioned in the major international instances, for example, the UN Food Systems Summit, as well as the G20. And let me draw your attention to the fact that the coalition is mentioned in the Declaration of Heads of State and Government of the G20 at the end of October, in the Rome Declaration, as well as within European and African bodies. And the African Union itself is a member of our coalition. To meet our objectives, the states are based on several pillars within the coalition. First of all, a research consortium led by Professor Bundy, who will be telling us more about this in a few moments. Secondly, a working group on sustainable funding for health and nutrition at school. The first analysis will be presented during the upcoming World Forum on Education. And thirdly, and I think this is very important for the OECD, there is also a monitoring mechanism to improve the availability and the quality of data. And here the OECD can play an extremely important role. And lastly, a network of governmental experts, so peer-to-peer network, led by Germany, to share best practices. To conclude, as you can see, this coalition, even though it is very recent, has already produced tangible and significant results. And I would like to thank all of the colleagues and member countries. We're not alone, obviously, all of the actors from countries involved in this coalition for all of the efforts that have been accomplished. And the success of our coalition is based on this massive support for future generations. And obviously, I encourage all of you and all of the partners of the OECD member countries and stakeholders present today to join us to work all together to meet the coalition's objectives to ensure that every child has a healthy and nutritious meal every day, all over the world. Thank you very much, and I wish you a very fruitful debate today. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your intervention.
Professor Donald Bundy from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Professor Bundy will present work being undertaken on school meal programs by the Research Consortium for School Health and Nutrition to support the School Meals Coalition. Professor Bundy, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Celine, for that kind introduction, and big thank you to the OECD for initiating and organizing this workshop. I'm certainly, our hope is that we will be sharing an extended version of the presentation I'm about to make, of the slides, with some links on and so forth, so that we can use this as a way of connecting that this isn't just about a presentation now, it's also about where we go with that. So I hope you'll get a sense of that from the presentation today. I have the pleasure of building on Ambassador Jurgensen's very encouraging entree to our discussions today, that the coalition that was created by some 70 member states, so if I could stay with the first slide, please, that was created by the 70 member states, has also now created a research consortium to help provide credible and independent research to inform evidence-based decision-making. And I think that's really what I want to go with the discussion. It's going to be about the Research Consortium. But if I have the first slide, please, I'm going to start by building on what Ambassador Jurgensen was saying about where this came from. So if we go back to January 2020, and these are World Food Programme data, we can see that some 388 million children were being fed every day globally, and that this represented the most extensive safety net the world had seen, and also the largest number of school children fed daily at any point in human history. So, and that in itself represented 10 years of sustained growth in this area. So this is a very positive movement. And why had countries done it? They'd done it in part to build human capital, that they started to recognize that having provided free compulsory education, one of the programs that almost all countries in the world provide, that the other side of the coin was also to support the learners in that learning, and that supporting the children, particularly the girls, was a vital part of achieving full potential, full human capital. Many of you will be well aware that human capital represents 70% of the wealth of OECD countries, but only 30% of poor resourced countries' wealth. In other words, the value of the human population is something we probably should see far more investment in. And I also just want to highlight Leanne's comment at the beginning about using these opportunities during the growth of a child up to early adulthood, becoming an adult, making sure that that child also developed lifelong healthy behaviors, and in particular, lifelong dietary preferences that we know now is one of the best ways of addressing obesity. So that's what we saw. And who was supporting this? If I could have the next slide, please. Well, if we looked, and so these are histograms, and to the right of the two sets of histograms are the middle and high income countries. So this is ranked by income. What we can see is that we've seen a continual, over the last 10 years, a movement towards countries owning these programs. So the number of countries that have policies for school health and nutrition has risen over that period. But if we look at the actual financing, we see even more remarkably that this is a very significant area of investment by countries. Indeed, in OECD countries, almost 100% of the investment is covered by domestic financing, and globally, more than 90% of the investment is from domestic sources. I'm emphasizing that to show that these are country-owned activities. This is something that countries themselves are seeking to do. And that was the situation at the beginning of 2020, not long ago. If I have the next slide, please. Within 4 months, so by April 2020, the picture had almost entirely reversed. Now we saw 370 million children no longer being fed. These are World Food Programme data. We suddenly see children, we suddenly see all the schools being closed. We see the worst education crisis in history, many children losing up to a year of education. We see the worst consequences, and again, this is Leanne's comments earlier on, the worst consequences were for the poorest country, for the poorest children. Even in the richest countries, it was the poorest children, and especially girls, who were most affected by this. Indeed, we've seen this picture of permanent dropout in some cases of especially schoolgirls becoming wives, becoming mothers, and never going back to school once the schools reopened. So a global realization came that this was important, that the delivery through schools, the school-based delivery of nutrition, of health, of education, of social support was much more important than we were giving it credit for. And it's that strengthened the resolve of countries to create the coalition and to try and build back the school-based systems. If I go to the next slide, please. And in moving towards that, the coalition that Ambassador Jurgensen describes, or a coalition now of 70 countries, established this set of initiatives to drive this forward. The Research Consortium, which I'm going to talk about in more detail, but also the Sustainable Financing Task Force of the Global Education Commission, the peer-to-peer community of best practice, which the government of Germany is leading on, and the World Food Programme leading on a new data and monitoring system for school children and adolescents. Amazingly, the world doesn't have that. There is no system that's tracking the health and education together of school-age children. So these new initiatives then are key to moving forward. And I'm going to focus on the Research Consortium specifically. If I could have the next slide, please. So the Research Consortium was the first of the initiatives to be launched, but it is still only 6 months old. So just to be clear, we are talking about something very new here. And that the purpose of the Research Consortium was to generate evidence and explore value for money of programs, and to use that evidence and understanding to provide programmatic guidance to countries. So this is very much about countries asking for advice and the world working together to try and provide that advice. That's where the consortium is moving. If I could have the next slide, please. So this is the Research Consortium's overall structure. It's as we heard, there are nearly 70 countries in the coalition, and it's to those countries that the consortium reports. There's a small secretariat in the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, but that really only exists to act as a coordinating base for a global consortium. And the consortium was conceived of not as a new institution, but as bringing together the existing groups, the existing individuals, and the existing institutions working in this area to create global networks of understanding. So this is about a flexible grouping. It's also about an independent grouping. We're delighted, of course, to have so many partners working with us, but the focus is around academic institutions and think tanks. And in order to achieve this global reach, because I think that's the crucial factor here, a series of global communities of practice have been set up. At the moment, there's just 4 of these, and there could be more as ideas come up. And each of these communities of practice is exploring a particular idea, a particular question, using a globally constituted audience. So I want to say that individuals and institutions anywhere in the world can be part of these communities of practice. Already some studies are underway, but this year we are beginning or launching a push to expand engagement. And we will soon be advertising a series of public events around each of these communities of practice and inviting your participation in those, specifically in order to ensure that we really capture a global vision. I should also explain that there are 3 main cross-cutting themes that are part of this structure: diversity, equity, and inclusion; sustainable financing, obviously with the task force, and finally cultivating talent. We need to make sure that youth growing up now feel there is a career opportunity for them in this area of work. We need more engagement. We need young and new brains involved in this. So if I could have the next slide, please. I'm just now going to go through those 4 communities of practice to just highlight some of their main features. So the first community of practice is the impact and evidence group. So this is looking at systematic reviews of the evidence that these school health and school meals programs have impact. What works best, what doesn't work. And so this is being led through the Cochrane global review process. So that's again a process we can all readily engage in, and we hope that later this year we will have some initial results from that. Secondly, the next community of practice, the next slide please, is the analytics and metrics team, which is looking at the value for money of school meals programs, working already at the global, regional and country levels. Initial analyses suggest that the returns to school feeding programs are around $9 for every dollar invested. And if I could have the third community of practice slide. So this is nutrition measurement. It is astonishing to learn that the world doesn't have an agreed process for measuring the nutritional status of school children and adolescents. And so one of the things that the consortium was asked to do as a priority was to help set up a group to explore this. And there's a group now led by the NIH nutrition teams, with USDA, but also with a global steering committee, and we'll be talking about some public workshops from that group actually in March. And if I could have the next slide, which is the final point, which is communities of practice. Communities of practice that look at good examples of practice. And this is one of the key areas governments are asking the consortium to help with, identifying good programming practice by case studies of what actually goes on in countries. So this is benchmarking against real experience. And we're already moving forward in some OECD countries, and I've got Canada, Finland, France, and the United Kingdom listed there, but there are others that are interested, as well as looking at large-scale programs elsewhere, especially Brazil, China, and India, etc. And then at new programs that are programs in other parts of the world. And I'm just going to finish by saying that this is an area that's very much in development. And if I could have the next slide, please, we'd like to ask that, or make a call to action, if you like, that those of you who are watching this and listening to this, who want to develop a case study for other countries, we're very interested in that. Do contact us and let's have a discussion about how we can move forward. But in finishing, I want to say, if I could just have the last slide, that we will be sending out the slide deck. We will be sending out links. Do get in touch with us. The success of what we do is dependent on that. It's dependent on you, and it's dependent on building real communities of practice that are global and effective. So on that, I will finish my my presentation and hand back to you, Celine. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Professor Bundy, for providing this setting of the scene. Your call to action is very clear. And now I'd like to spend some time informing you about the work that the OECD Trade and Agriculture Directorate is undertaking on how to make better policies for food systems and how this work relates to the topic of school meals. Then I will invite my colleagues to join in a panel discussion on research or the OECD directorates are undertaking on different aspects of school meal programs. So why is the OECD Trade and Agriculture Directorate interested in school meals? Let's think about global food systems. They're facing currently a formidable triple challenge. First, they are expected to provide food security and nutrition. Second, they have to contribute to the livelihoods of millions along the food chain. And third, they need to do so in an environmentally sustainable way. My team published in January 2021, ahead of the UN Food Systems Summit, the Making Better Policies for Food Systems report. And this report highlights important interaction effects between different policy areas, which have quite often been treated in silos. For example, there are important interactions between food systems related policies, and today we're interested in school meal programs, and environmental or health or social outcomes. Unfortunately, making better policies for food systems requires too often overcoming evidence gaps. And these gaps are quite extensive. And we want to accompany our member countries in addressing them. So we've chosen to look at 3 topics related to the 3 dimensions of the triple challenge, that is livelihood, environmental sustainability, and food security and nutrition. And concerning the food security and nutrition challenge, and reflecting on the consequences of the COVID-19 crisis, we are undertaking some work on what is known and what is not known regarding food insecurity across OECD countries. And I have to say that a lot is still unknown. Our project will also provide insights on how to respond to food insecurity with food assistance programs, such as food vouchers, food banks, and our topic of interest for today's school meals. So we are right now undertaking a deep dive research on school meals, which is based on case studies from 4 OECD member countries, the United States, Finland, Chile, and New Zealand. And we'll hear later on about the Finnish and the Chilean experiences. In a nutshell, here are some of our preliminary learnings. First, important learning, and the Ambassador Jorgensen really made that point clear. School meal programs are more than meals provided at school. So school meal programs contribute to fighting food insecurity. Some school meal programs target kids from lower socioeconomic backgrounds by providing free lunches and breakfast. Some other programs are more universal with free meals for all. In addition, school meal programs contribute to healthier food habits. And it's really important across OECD countries where overweight and obesity prevalence is growing among children, and in particular for families from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. We have published a report on socioeconomic and demographic aspects of food security and nutrition last year, and you can find the link in the chat. School meal programs also contribute positively to the sustainability and livelihood challenges the food systems are facing right now via guidelines related to the food that's being served or food procurement policies. And finally, school meal programs contribute to better educational outcomes and can foster equality across the society. Another important learning is that monitoring and evaluation efforts are key to make sure that the programs are as efficient as possible. Some countries have developed indicators to monitor the school meal programs, including welfare indicators, indicators on health and educational outcomes, and indicators on the acceptance and the attendance by kids. I have to say we haven't found yet a lot of information on the program's cost and budgets or the return on investment that Don was mentioning earlier. And this, I think, is a clear important evidence gap. I'll stop here as we are now going to learn from more analysis that's being undertaken by colleagues across the OECD, and then later on from national experiences of 3 OECD member countries. So I'll be the moderator, and I'd like to introduce you to my OECD colleagues. So first we have Olivier Thévenot, who is the head of the Children's Wellbeing Unit in the OECD Center for Wellbeing, Inclusion, Sustainability and Equal Opportunity. So I'm going to have Erika Bozé from the OECD's Public Governance Directorate. Erika works on government procurement. And third, I have Francesca Gottschalk from the OECD Education and Skills Directorate. So Olivier, may I ask you a question? So can you please tell us from a child poverty perspective, what is the role of food assistance via school meals in the provision of family support services across OECD countries?
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everyone, and let me thank you, Celine, and the team for organizing this discussion and giving us the opportunity to bring our perspective in that discussion. I was very, very happy to observe that a few points that I will be raising in my comments have been already mentioned. So there is convergence on big aspects. So just to start with child poverty, as you know, there is a lot of evidence showing that child poverty, which is broadly defined as a lack of family income and material resources, has multiple impact on child well-being and development, including on health, on education, but also on emotional development and social outcomes. And despite parents' efforts to prioritize their children's consumption over their own, one of the consequences of family poverty is that children are exposed to food insecurity and nutritional deprivation. The provision of school meals is, of course, one means that should be used to combat these consequences of child poverty. And for example, this is one of the measures that are promoted under the European Child Guarantee. But what I would like to stress here is that in order to promote a policy, it's crucial to have good measure of the problem you want to address. And most countries are not well equipped in terms of statistics to assess the depth of the issue we are talking about today. I believe that official statistics on this issue underestimate the problem and therefore the value or the benefits of promoting school meals. And briefly, I would like to quote some figures to illustrate my point here. So the main source of data on this issue that European countries have come from the European surveys of income and living conditions. These surveys regularly ask whether children have been exposed to nutritional deprivation, meaning whether they regularly eat fruit or vegetables, meat or their equivalent, or whether they can afford to have that. And according to this data, an estimated 6% of children live in households facing such deprivation. It's more than twice this rate for households living below the poverty line. So around 14% of children, of poor children, are exposed to nutritional deprivation. And of course, there are wide disparities across countries, with, for instance, 27% of children in Hungary being exposed to that situation. And actually, in Hungary also, more than 54% of income poor children are exposed to such risk. However, asking the question in these terms is not sufficient to fully assess the issue, as other data can show. For example, we have data from education surveys. The surveys I'm mentioning here are teams and peers surveys for people who know these surveys, and they ask children whether they always have enough food or not when starting school in the morning. And about on average, 10 to 12% of children report that they don't have always enough food. So it's higher than the assessment we had with the first question, focusing on nutrition. But if you broaden the focus again, and then you also look at middle-aged children, you can find data from children world surveys that shows that for children aged 8 to 10, 20 to 40% of children report that they are often hungry when they arrive at school. And you know, the consequence that being hungry can have on school attendance and engagement in the class. So to make better school meal policies, it's really important to define what we want to fight and to measure it well. I'm echoing already what you mentioned.
Thanks, Olivier. That's very clear. Erika, can you please tell us about the role of public procurement in school meal programs? So basically, how can procurement tenders be specified to deliver on the sustainability objectives, food systems, or supporting food producers? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Salim, and thank you very much for giving the opportunity to highlight the importance and relevance of public procurement for sustainable school food programs. I also would like to, of course, welcome all the participants. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are and connected to this event. On average, OECD countries spend around 12% of their GDP through public procurement every year. And it also means that 30% of government expenditure is spent via public procurement. So it really shows the importance and relevance of public procurement. Of course, we don't have exact data on how much money is spent for food procurement in the different OECD countries, but in most OECD countries, public schools, or for public schools, school food has to be purchased via public procurement procedures. So it can be a really huge amount of, again, public money which is spent through public procurement. So that's why it does really matter how these school food procurements are conducted, how the requirements are set up, what kind of conditions are defined in the contract. And if procurement is done well, and if public procurement is used in a strategic way, then it can substantially contribute to improve the sustainability of food production and consumption, both directly and indirectly. And we always have to keep in mind this really huge size of the market that, let's say, the school food market means, because if those who are doing this purchase, public procurement on behalf of the public schools, set up requirements which are related to sustainability, then they can really drive the demand for sustainable products and services and lead by example. So that's why it's really important to be really conscious and cautious about how public procurements for school food are designed, because it can be a really important incentive for the market, again, to offer sustainable food to schools. And actually, this makes public procurement a key focus area in sustainability policies like the Sustainable Development Goals, or for example, in the EU's Farm to Fork strategy. And here I also would like to mention that OECD has its standard on public procurement. This is the OECD recommendation on public procurement. Of course, it's focused not on school food or not even food. It's a general and holistic tool, but again, it also promotes the sustainable and strategic use of public procurement. And OECD is doing a lot of work on sustainable public. I think I was muted by the host, so hopefully you can hear me again. So OECD is doing a lot of work on sustainable public procurement. And recently we even worked with one of the OECD members and with one of its region in Portugal, with the Central region, and trying to understand how public procurement can be used to incorporate circular economy principles in school food public procurement, because this was the purchasing category that this smaller community picked up, and different schools and other public organizations works together to learn from each other, but also to somehow get some support from OECD to understand how public procurements can be designed in a way which support the implementation of circular economic principles in school food procurement. And of course, I also would like to highlight in this really short time frame that in most of the OECD countries, the public procurement policy and regulatory frameworks offer several opportunities and tools for the public procurement of health-sensitive, tasty, sustainable school food, which have lower environmental impact, which have reduced food waste. And without going into the details, just giving you a few examples. In the recent years, even OECD is promoting a lot to put a lot of focus on market research, market engagement before the official public procurement procedure is launched. Because if in the preparatory phase, those who will do the public procurement procedure will do a proper market research and engage with the market, so with the potential bidders, then they can communicate their sustainability expectations to the market. But they can also understand what the potential bidders can offer in terms of more sustainable food. But I also would like to highlight here the award criteria. I guess there is this perception that public procurement is always focusing on the lowest price, and they would like to purchase the cheapest option. Of course, in the practice, we can see, unfortunately, a lot of examples for this. But again, the regulatory and the policy framework allows contracting authorities to evaluate not just the price, but also the quality. And if they bring in this quality dimension, it means that they can evaluate the increased variety of products, lower fat options, more plant-based menus, healthier food preparation methods, seasonability of the fruits and vegetables, and so on and so on. So what I just wanted to highlight here, that the opportunity is there. Also, there are still other tools like the contract performance conditions and so on and so on. I don't want to go into the technical details. Again, I think the main message that the framework is there, the opportunities are offered, but the practice is still somehow lagging behind. I hope I answered your question, Celine.
Yes, Erika, very well. Thank you for these very interesting points. And I guess we have many practitioners around the virtual tables, and they are really interested in hearing from your view on how procurement policies can actually tackle the sustainability challenge that food systems are facing. Now, I'd like to hand the floor to my colleague from the Education Directorate. And Francesca, could you please tell us about the findings from the OECD's 21st Century Children Project with regards to how school meals programs are contributing to addressing educational, health, and well-being inequalities for children?
Hi, Celine, and hi, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak here today. Thank you for all the people listening in for joining us. I, like Olivier, will try not to touch too much on the same points as other colleagues, but really you can see that there are a lot of links between the work that we're doing around the house, which is great. So we know that on the one hand, poor dietary habits and nutrition are linked to health outcomes such as overweight, obesity, malnutrition, and food insecurity is associated with poor developmental, behavioral, and educational outcomes. And malnourishment can impair or delay skill development. And as colleagues previously have mentioned, those who are most likely to be food insecure are disadvantaged students. Whereas on the other hand, a healthy diet can be predictive of quality of life and better mental health, and is also implicated in better educational outcomes. What we know is that children around OECD countries eat on average 1 meal per day at school. And in some systems, the food that they consume at school is actually healthier than what they consume outside of school. So at a very basic level, we know that eating meals at school can help students succeed because it gives them energy and it satiates their hunger. To take this even further, a healthy and a balanced school meal can target nutrient deficiencies that, if left untreated, can impair their ability to focus and retain information. So very basically, eating good food can help children, it can support their hunger and their nutrient deficiencies if they have them. Eating lunch at school has been associated generally with an increase in diet quality, food security, and academic performance. And these effects can be more pronounced when systems incorporate healthier options on menus, moving away, as Erica mentioned, from some of the low budget and highly processed foods to more seasonal foods incorporating fruits and veggies. We see on average in OECD countries, children are consuming more fruits and vegetables in recent years, but this is also accompanied by an overall increase in calorie consumption. So good news and bad news. So providing healthy and nutritious options for students at school can be a cost-effective way of boosting academic performance. Furthermore, school meal programs can actually act as a way of introducing students to unfamiliar foods. And we know that introducing children to unfamiliar foods and repeated exposure to foods that they might have previously rejected can promote them to test and even like foods that they thought they didn't. This is particularly important for students from more disadvantaged backgrounds because there is an opportunity cost for students or children rejecting foods. And the cost of wasted foods means that families from low-income backgrounds are more likely to choose safer foods, which tend to be more processed and therefore highly palatable. We know that early life food experiences are predictive of nutrition and eating behaviors later on in life. Therefore, exposing children to healthy options in schools and letting them take healthy decisions for what they consume in school can help especially the most disadvantaged increase their consumption of healthy foods both in childhood and later on. And I'd like to just finish with a quote. According to UNICEF, millions of children are eating too little of what they need and millions are eating too much of what they don't need. So if we can use school meal programs to support the most disadvantaged students by giving them the access they need to healthy foods, as well as all students to make healthier decisions in school, that seems to be the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francesca. And this is a great transition to our next panel, which will be about countries' experiences. And we're going to learn from 3 countries, Finland, Japan, and Chile. And I'm actually pretty sure that they're going to tackle some of the points you're mentioning or you've mentioned. I see several questions in the chat. We're going to address them later on in the Q&A part of the webinar. So let me introduce you to our, Olivier, you have risen your hand? No, okay. So let me introduce you to the 3 panelists. So my first panelist is Minna Huttunen, who is a ministerial advisor from the Finnish Ministry of Agriculture. The second panelist is Ritsuko Yoneda, who is an FAO economist, the former director for the OECD at the International Affairs Departments of the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries from Japan. And the third panelist is Mariana Lira, who is a senior researcher at the National Council for School Assistance in the Ministry of Education from Chile. So let's start. Minna, can you please tell me about Finland's school meal programs? How long has it been running? How is it linked with Finland's national dietary guidelines?
Thank you for the opportunity to share the Finnish experience. Indeed,
The free of charge school meals have been provided in Finland since the 1940s. And this means that Finland has the world's longest running free of charge school meal system. A law on providing free of charge school meals for all pupils came into force in 1943. And what I would like to really point out, it's important to acknowledge that at that time, Finland was a poor country and still at war. And the war resulted in a large number of internally displaced people with reduced access to proper food and nutrition. After a 5-year transition period, so it was 1948, the school feeding system had reached a nationwide scale. So you can see that a strong political commitment, 5 years time period, and that was enough. The economy was not a restraining factor because of the political commitment. So school meal is really a social innovation with the aim of supporting children's learning, nutrition, and health. It has to be composed according to nutrition guidelines. And in Finland, school meals provide 30% of the daily energy need of the child. Also, sustainability is an important factor, and schools are encouraged to serve a vegetarian meal to all pupils at least once a week. The school meal recommendations, Eating and Learning Together, is also available in English, and I understood that the link will be provided in the chat. We see that school meal is really fuel for learning. It improves learning capacity. It's also education on healthy and sustainable diet, local produce, education on the food cultures. But in addition, it provides and improves equality. Both parents can work outside home, and this increased labor force participation brings additional economic growth for the country. So you can see that we address much wider social contribution than nutrition. And because of these far-reaching effects, school meals really deserve appropriate guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you, Minna. Let's now move to the other part of the world, and let's get Ritsuko's insights on the history of the Japanese school meal programs and what are the priorities of this program today. Ritsuko, please.
Thank you, Celine, and thank you for inviting me. And it's very happy to share Japanese experience and how school meal program has been developed. And it is in Japan, it is commonly said that the origin of the school meal program can be found in 1889 and at the private school founded by the Buddhist temple. And the resource was completely by donation collected by Buddhist monk. And the Japanese government found its usefulness and school meals usefulness, and they recommended to all over Japan, but the movement was suspended due to the World War II. And then after World War II ended, at the time Japan was so much poor and the kids are starving, so they have a serious need to improve nutrition. So the school meal program has started again. And at the time, the basic menu was a bowl of skimmed milk and the bread and something else. And so those were based on the humanitarian assistance from the United States. And then also, it is commonly understood that this basic menu and it changed a little bit the Japanese dietary culture, and because Japan was not and still is not a wheat producing country, so bread or wheat consumption was not a traditional culture of Japan. But due to the basic menu and bowl of skimmed milk and the bread, and which was proliferated all over Japan, and the bread and wheat consumption became a part of Japanese dietary culture. So I echo Francesca said, school meal has a power to expose unfamiliar food to the children. So the importance of the school meal was well recognized. So, and the national law on the school meals was entered into force in 1954, and the primary purposes were indicated at the beginning, and the three main purposes are there. The firstly, to maintain fitness through adequate nutrition intake. The second was to cultivate the good lifelong dietary preferences. The third one is to foster spirit of cooperation through serving, eating, and learning with classmates. And now over 99% of elementary school and over 90% of middle school provides kids with the school meals. And we can find some pictures of them. And the first one is school meal is officially has a status of a part of educational program as indicated in law. And then the second one is all menus are nutritionally well planned by the nutritionist. And the third one, current now, and the local producers now widely encouraged to use to learn how food is produced. That's an educational material. But of course, we're taking so much attention to the trade rules and not impeding the WTO agriculture, an agreement on agriculture, of course. And then talking about the nutrition aspects, all the menu is planned to cover 1/3 of nutrition intake per day. And we cannot forget that for the household which has a lower economic background, the school meals is a major source of nutrition even in Japan. That's a very important point. And also, I'd like to share two interesting examples of how meals are used in the educational material. The first one is, and from my experience, the first one is to invite local producers and to explain how food was produced, and that's a really lively luncheon seminar for children to learn how the vegetables and how meat are prepared. So the second one is really interesting that as I said, all the meals are planned, nutritionally well planned. So monthly meal plan was distributed to kids in advance, which indicating ingredients also. So children can learn what is the source of protein and vitamin and other nutrients with enjoying the lunch, looking at the school meal plan. So that is an important point that we have had so far. So as I explained, in Japan, school meal is a really important part of the education. And also, so Japan exercising international cooperation to promote school meals all over the world, and which are led by both government and private firms. And the Japanese government is really seeking further contribution through the school meal coalition. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Ritsuko. So we can see that school meals can be a way to teach kids about the food they eat, how it's produced, and also about the food they're going to eat when they are grown up. Let's now move to Mariana Lira from Chile. And I'd like to hear, please, Mariana, about the links between the school meals program in Chile and Chile's policy response to obesity. And in particular, I'm interested in the link with the labeling law and dietary guidelines. Over to you.
Thank you. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to share the Chilean experience. Well, our school meal program is strongly aligned with obesity tagging policies that have been established in Chile. All the ingredients used to prepare breakfasts and lunches are without black label seals. That means that these ingredients are within the limits of salt, saturated fats, calories, and sugar stipulated by this new law. Second, the meals are adjusted to the food requirements of students, taking the Chilean food guides as reference. That means that we consider the frequency of certain foods, such as fruits and vegetables, fish, water, dairy, legume, amongst others. Likewise, the food structure of the program is based on the nutritional requirements recommended by international organizations, such as the amount of protein, fat, carbs, in addition to the limiting the total salt intake of meals. That is to say, the school dishes delivered are considered healthy, wholesome in a context of monthly meal planning made by dietitians. That is why it is important that students attend every day to get the most out of this benefit. On the other hand, there are other elements that the program carries out and that go beyond what is mentioned in the law, such as that the size of the served portions is according to the age of the students. that the meals are freshly and daily prepared inside the school kitchens, using natural or minimally processed foods. And for this, we rely on local food producers, which in turn also boost the economies of these small sectors. Finally, note that one of the most important things that the school meal program does is that it reaches the entire country, from north to south, even to very, very remote areas, which ensures access and availability of these very healthy meals and very varied and healthy foods to vulnerable students, no matter where they go to school. Okay, so we attend more than 1,800,000 students. That I guess for most countries that's not much, but that represents more than 50% of the enrolled students that are in elementary, middle, and high school. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mariana, and thanks to our three country experts for this fascinating discussion. We could actually, I could ask more questions, but I think it's now time to give the possibility to our audience, to participants, to actually either comment on what you've heard or ask questions. I'm seeing some questions in the chat, but I would say that if someone wants to make a comment or take the floor, you can actually raise your hand right now. So maybe I just give you a little bit of time to raise your hand. And I have a question for Erika in the chat. And it was about what is the practice for low mid-income countries on procuring locally from smallholders farmers? Do you have any country in mind that actually try to empower local economy of farmers through procurement from smallholders?
Thank you very much for the question. I think it's a really important question. I'm afraid I cannot really give a concrete country example, but recently we saw several, let's say, attempts to somehow include more locally based economic operators, bidders in this kind of procurement. And when I mentioned that in Portugal, we also had this, let's say, pilot exercise on understanding how circular economy principles can be incorporated in school food procurement. This was also one of the elements that we try to understand how can, let's say, locally produced food and how the local farmers can be incorporated in these tender procedures. And here I also would like to refer back to Leanne's introductory remarks, because this is one of the issues that I think still require further research, because of course it's a really important priority to give, let's say, more opportunities for these local firms. But on the other hand, we still have to respect the principles of public procurement and not creating trade barriers, as it was said earlier, and also respecting the competition. So I would say, and sorry if I don't give you a really straightforward answer, but this is exactly one of those questions that we are also trying to look at closer, how these competing, let's say, principles or expectations can be balanced in these kind of procurements.
Thanks very much, Erika. I see three hands actually up. May I ask you, when I call your name, if you can put your camera on and just to tell us where you're from. So not a big introduction, but just tell us who you are and where you're coming from. So I see Mr. or Miss Mikkelsen.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Bent Ekberg Mikkelsen, Professor of Urban Food Systems Transformation at Copenhagen University. That's really interesting. I really appreciate this new focus on school food as a part of food systems and the focus on livelihoods and all these kind of things. What surprised me, or the point I would like to make, is that so far we've been speaking mainly about food provision that kids they eat, which is of course really in many countries, not in all countries, is an important part of the school day. I would say for my own country, it's not necessarily a part of the school day that you actually eat. What wonders me, or what surprised me a bit, or the point I'm going to make, is that the most powerful place in a school is not the canteen, that's the classroom. So I wonder if any of the speakers would like to comment on the fact that if you look at this as empowerment, then it's not only about eating, it's about empowering kids through the curricula, the learning, the classroom activities. And that, I think, is the most powerful place. So the best thing you could do when speaking about food at school is to link the classroom and the canteen.
Thanks. Any of our country experts, do you want to react to this point? Mina, please.
Thank you very much. That's indeed very true. So having the lunch is just one part of the meal education, and then it's about the whole food environment at school. For example, our school meal recommendations really talk about the whole experience, also about the vending machines, that there's not supposed to be any unhealthy products in them, how you will integrate the learning experience, so you can have theme weeks, and you should integrate food into the classroom education as well. So it's not only about the lunch, it's about a bigger entity, that's for sure. And we are moving towards that direction. There's still room to grow, for sure. Thank you.
Now, let me hand over the floor to Ritsuko and then to Francesca.
Thank you, Professor Mikkelson. I really totally agree with you. And from the Japanese perspectives, and as I said, the main purpose of school meal is not just eating, then to serving and to eating and learning to wrapping up. All the process will be is done by children. And so that's another point, and how we are integrated into the education. So they learn behavior, they learn from each other, and they learn from the meal itself. That's an Japanese standpoint. I totally agree with you. Thank you.
Thank you. And Francesca, do you want to comment as well?
Yes, please. I would love to. Just to echo what the colleagues previously mentioned, we know that a number of education systems around OECD countries have specific measures in place. This tags onto what Minna said, to establish a healthy food environment in the school. So this can include creating guidelines for creating healthy food environments, regulations or restrictions on the type of foods that can be sold or provided in schools. In some systems, we also see that there's a specific budget for hiring teachers with specific knowledge of diet and nutrition to provide guidance to students. And there are also avenues of getting professional support and financial assistance for schools to create their own healthy eating plans. And then if I could just touch very quickly on the importance of health literacy. This is something that we've seen that's been incorporated in a number of OECD countries into the curriculum. So improving health literacy, we know, is important to meet the demands of health in today's society. And low health literacy can exacerbate existing socioeconomic inequalities and is associated with a number of negative outcomes like poor self-reported health, lower rates of exercise, and higher BMI. And being health literate is really important to empower individuals to be able to take control over their health and make their own health decisions, understanding how different lifestyle habits, such as making good food decisions in schools or at home, can help or hinder their health, both in the short and the long term. So we've seen this type of teaching and learning incorporated into curricula, specifically into health studies, but also into other relevant areas, such as in science, for example. So I think what colleagues have touched on in terms of the food environment, as well as using the curriculum really as a tool to promote healthy choices and healthy eating in children, is really important.
Thanks, Francesca. And I see that Mariana also wants to comment. Please, Mariana.
Yes, very quickly. We had a small project that was suspended by the pandemic, where we used the orchard that were in school as a tool, educational tool, where you could perform different activities related to the different curriculum topics, like, I don't know, math, music, English, science, natural and social sciences. and all that. And we took the curriculum of the Educational Ministry of Education and we applied it to the orchard. And so we took them out of the classroom and we used the orchard to learn different experience, but always learning, I don't know, math, like I said, math, music, and all this. That was it. I wanted to share that experience.
Thanks for this. I see many hands up. So actually, I will disappoint some of you, but we will have to finish on time. So we won't be able to take all questions. That's quite clear. So I'll ask for short questions and short answers. So probably just one, panelist or one expert to answer each of the questions. So I have Ms. Gertner. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm a master's student currently doing nutrition and rural development, and I am working on my thesis, which is a case study on school feeding in Tanzania, which is a country in which, students have to provide their own firewood, parents have to pay and provide the actual food. Often the meals are very, very simple. It's usually 3 ingredients at most. And I have included a little questionnaire in which I ask teachers and parents what they personally think school feeding needs in Tanzania or how it would be improved. And surprisingly, none of them really request for a lot of government involvement or a centralization of the program, but rather they want to ensure and maintain responsibility with the parents and make sure that parents are actually aware of the fact that they need to feed their children properly. So my question is there any program, is there any country that you know of that includes not only the education of children, which I guess can happen very playfully and kind of in the everyday life or in the everyday school curriculum, but also involves parents, because I feel that this is quite an important issue, and that a lot of parents, if they're not, a lot of them of course are not financially capable, but even above that, they are not aware of the importance of nutrition for their children and what that has to do with their education.
Okay, so who wants to answer that important question? How parents role in? Yeah, please, Mina.
Thank you. Because of the very long history of school meals, also in Finland, that's how it all started. So children would bring parts of the meal to school with them, and families have been involved in this process throughout the time. Still now, when there's some parent-teacher meeting and so forth, also school meals are being discussed. And it really depends on the school, how much the families are involved. We know that not all of the school children eat the meal, even though it's free. And in order to improve the number of children who eat the meal, they have to be involved in the whole process. And also parent support is helping in that way. But then we also realize that not all parents are able to support the children, and that's when the school role becomes bigger. Thank you.
Thanks, Mina. Let's move to Ms. McKenna. You have the floor. A short question, please.
Sure. Yeah, Mary McKenna from Canada, and we do not have a federally funded school food program, surprisingly, but we're on the cusp, and so politically, there's some of the pushback that is occurring is people saying, well, this is parents' responsibility. This is not the school's responsibility to feed kids. So I was wondering if others have run into that issue and how they've addressed it. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Any comment from Japan or Chile on this point? Yeah, please, Ritsuko.
Thank you, Ms. McKenna, for the question. And in fact, the Japanese school meal program is mostly run by local government, and they are suffering from the costs. For Japanese perspective, school meal program is well embedded to their part of their education program. So there's not so much such a big discussion like feeding is a completely responsibility of the responsibility of the household, and every family think about, and this is naturally the part of the program. So that is a kind of public perception of Japanese society. Thank you.
Thank you, Ritsuko. Let's move to maybe our last question. Maybe we can have two, but Ms. Niklas, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the organization of this great initiative. For me, food and food system is also very strongly linked to sustainability. And we haven't heard much of this. We heard a lot about health, which is, of course, a very important issue. But especially in affluent countries, I think we're also thinking about how to make our diets more sustainable. And that's a line of thinking that's very important. So I think that this should not be forgotten in the initiative. For public procurement, I wonder what are the link with the EU regulation, because this is actually a barrier in Europe towards more sustainable foods in school canteens. And my last comment is about the comment of Dr. Mikkelsen. We all know that kids will follow our example, but not our advice. And so I think it's very, very important to keep food education at the table and not only in school. Thank you.
Sorry, Erika, do you want to respond to Ms. Niklas' question?
Yes, thank you very much, Sarine, and thank you very much for the question, Ms. Niklaus. In terms of the linkages to the EU public procurement regulatory framework, maybe there are some constraints, but on the other hand, as I mentioned, the legal and regulatory framework gives a lot of opportunity. And even the European Commission is trying to, of course, issue several guidances on how these sustainability requirements can be incorporated in public procurement procedures. There are these special green public procurement criteria that was developed by the European Commission. They also developed some kind of life cycle tools, especially focusing on also some food and food products and catering services. I know that we cannot go into the details now, but I would say that there are initiatives on the level of the EU as well, which try to, again, incorporate all these kind of sustainability issues. Hopefully there will be some continuation of this discussion, and then we can go into the details, because again, what we see as a problem is not really the legal framework at work, but it's rather how it is implemented in the practice. And this is what I try to refer in my first intervention, that there are much more opportunities, but the implementation is still lagging behind. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Erika. And if I may add to your question, Ms. Niklas, Lian, in her closing remarks, will address some of the links between school meal programs and sustainability as a sustainability challenge. And we will provide information about the Swedish program, which exactly looks at that point. I'm sorry, Mr. Mickey, we won't have time for your questions, so please send it in the chat and we will send it to the right person so that you get an answer. So what I propose now is that we move to the closing remarks and that I hand the floor over to Lian. Please, Lian.
Great. Thank you so much, Celine, and thank you everyone for being here as speakers, and also to the participants listening and asking these great questions. Today's webinar was really focusing on how to make better policies for school meals. And it was great to be able to hear more about the School Meals Coalition, Nutrition, Health, and Education for Every Child, which, as we learned, was launched at the UN Food Systems Summit. And it's a really great opportunity to focus attention on this issue, to think about how we can make better policies in this space. One of the questions that we had just right at the end also reminded us that we need to think, or it would be useful to think about how these kinds of policies and programs can contribute to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And we know that at the same time, food systems are facing a really dramatic triple challenge. And we heard this kind of in the beginning of the framing of the session, We know that food systems have to ensure food security and nutrition for a growing population, but also support livelihoods for millions of farmers and others working in the food chain. And really importantly now, the focus is also on the fact that food systems need to be doing this in an environmentally sustainable way. So we need to be thinking creatively about what kinds of approaches will help us tackle that triple challenge. And to be clear, the challenges are really enormous. So globally, 2 billion people don't have regular access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food. And an even greater number of the world's population are overweight or obese. We also have technological and structural changes that have been lowering incomes for people working on 570 million farms worldwide. And the entire food system accounts for somewhere between 21 and 37% of all man-made greenhouse gas emissions. So it's a really big set of challenges that we're facing, and it's good that we can collectively try to think about how to solve them. The research that we've been doing has been highlighting some of the issues that make it particularly hard to address food systems challenges. One of the issues is how challenging it is to create coherent policies, because this requires that government agencies and stakeholders are working together to maximize synergies and figure out how to minimize the trade-offs. And we all know how challenging that can be to have coherence across multiple actors. But what we've heard from today is quite encouraging. We have some examples of school meal programs in countries where the programs are being developed in a coherent manner, and our OECD colleagues have also profiled some of their research that highlights best practices. So that's gives us a positive feeling about where we can go next. But maybe to come back on the other main obstacle, and this is something that my team is really working on, is that in order to make these better policies for food systems, we really need to think about our data and evidence. As I mentioned in my introductory remarks, even rich countries have data gaps, or especially around areas like food security for population and also understanding what people are actually eating. So data is really necessary to evaluate the impact of these policies. It's important because it helps us also understand whether or not taxpayers' money is being spent effectively to create outcomes that we're looking for. And that's why we're really pleased to continue supporting the outcomes from the UN Food Systems Summit and partnering as a knowledge partner using some of our cross-economy research. We're really delighted also that the Research Consortium for School Health and Nutrition will be developing more evidence on the effectiveness of school meal programs and highlighting these best practices across countries. And we'll be certainly keeping an eye on what's going on with the different communities of practice that we heard about at the beginning of this webinar. And finally, on sharing approaches, I would just like to draw your attention to a short video about Sweden's school meal programs and how these contribute to their food systems objectives. I think that's going into the chat now or in a minute. So just to wrap up, we're really looking forward to continuing these conversations, and I think we're on our way to figuring out how to make better policies for food systems and for school meals. Thank you, everyone.
And a final word. So I also want to thank you all speakers and everyone in the audience for your participation and interest. I also want to thank some persons behind the scene who made this event a success. So Elia Mosava Hamani and Eli Avery. Well, you're going to receive an email just later today with the slides and some links to OECD publication. We think that this event was really an awareness event, so we want to continue the discussion. This is the beginning of a journey, so feel free to reach out to us, and we'll try to work as much as possible with countries and relate to the consortium, research consortium as well. So a big thank to you all, and thank you. Well, see you soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Ciao. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Merci. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.